So my name is Ann Horvath, as you've heard. Can you raise your hand if you knew who I was before you came to this event? That's not intimidating at all. Cool. Okay, so the thing that I am probably most passionate about, I'm a designer, I'm a front-end engineer, I write a lot of code, I read a lot of design things, I write a lot of design things. But probably the thing that I'm most passionate about in my life and also now my career has been opening the door for more women like me. So, what does that mean? What is a woman like me? Where do I come from? So, I am from a little town across the bay called Hayward, California. Can you raise your hand if you know where Hayward even is? Wow, shout out, that's insane. I've never even, a comedian once described Hayward as the place people go to kill themselves. And so, you know, I just normally just don't bring it up anymore since that happened. I also spent a lot of my childhood in Oakland, California. Any Oaklanders? That's like 3, okay, I'll take it. You'll all be over there eventually. I'll be waiting. Just kidding, this isn't comedy hour. You ready? You ready to do this thing? Oh, cool, that's my Twitter handle. If you don't follow me, do that. Just kidding, that's not what this is about. I locked myself out of my own phone, too good at security as well. So I want to talk a little bit, shut up. No. I wanted to talk to you about a little bit about just like shifting the narrative around diversity in tech, like what that means and what opening the door for more women like me is like, and more women like the women that I love and care about and grew up with and who taught me everything that I know and made me the person that I am today. So the thing that I truly believe is that the narrative of diversity in tech has been largely colonized is the wrong word. So it's been largely steered towards white women in tech. I see a lot of white women here tonight. I'm half of one of you. And so this is not, anything disrespectful, but I think that, being introspective and kind of reflecting on our own privilege is a very important thing, and I think it's very necessary in order to change that narrative. And that's what I'm here to convince you all to do tonight, is become better allies to women of color in tech. So I think it's going to take all of us. I think we're going to fight a lot. I think we're all going to feel a little isolated and alone sometimes, but I think it's incredibly important that all of us work to be a little more intersectional and a little more inclusive in who we consider when we think about women in tech and the future of coding and the future of the technology industry. So for me, I have a pretty interesting background. I recently did a podcast called Code Newbie. Are you guys, any of you familiar with Code Newbie? She's a very enthusiastic yes over here. Same. I love Sarah, and she's an amazing person. Great community. Hashtag Code Newbie, if you want to look that up. So I recently did a podcast with them. A lot of really amazing people have been on this podcast, and me. And so I was talking, and I felt really comfortable in this podcast. And one of the things that came up was, the idea of opportunity and luck in technology. When I was very young, the technology industry did not look very accessible to me. I grew up in a very disadvantaged community. I am half Latino or Hispanic, depending on how you identify, Chicana. And for me, I didn't see, people like my family members and my friends in the technology industry, and so it was very hard to imagine myself there. And so now, as an adult, once I got into the technology industry, which I assumed was, I worked my ass off, I really worked hard to get here. And then looking back and thinking about, wow, like my friends from home, so creative, so talented, so smart. Why me? Like, why did I get into the technology industry? And it really forced me to be introspective and realize that, I'm actually the only friend of mine that is white passing. And that may have played a very large role in my success in the technology industry and even being here. I think colorism is a huge thing that we would all benefit from acknowledging a little more often. And I mean, that's hard. I think it's hard for a lot of people. I think we all have suffered hardship in one way or another. We've all had a difficult life. Life is hell, by the way. I'm aware of this, and I think it's really hard to acknowledge that you didn't necessarily earn everything you have, and that meritocracy isn't real. Like, that's a really kind of devastating and defeating feeling, to feel like you didn't make it on your own. But I also think it's an incredibly empowering one, and one that's very necessary to break down prejudices and also just to address the inequalities that exist, because the longer we ignore them, the longer that we're complicit in them. So, in 2014, I went public with a really negative experience I had at the company I was working at called GitHub. Anyone heard of GitHub? Hey, I built some of those things, I won't let them erase my work, don't worry. So I had already really started thinking about, okay, well, like, obviously I'm here, in part because I'm dumb luck, but also a lot because of my white passing privilege. I look 100% white. I know how to code switch. I know how to speak the language. I know how to send emails. It's not, those aren't things that a lot of people of color have access to. And it definitely played a role, or played a part into why I'm here. It's not all merit, obviously. But beyond that, I think that a big reason of why anyone listened to what I had to say in 2014 was also because this is the picture that was circulated. And what do white men in tech say? They say, my daughter, my wife, my cousin, my sister, my classmates, my peers. And I think that's why they were able to empathize with my own struggle, my own experience. Because in a big way, white men are conditioned to protect white women, but no one else. That was also really hard to accept, because what I went through was really difficult. It was really painful. There were some very dark moments. So to look back at that and say, the reason people listened was not because my experience was valid, but because I was white, was incredibly hard to do. But I think, again, incredibly necessary. So what both of those experiences, growing up, as a white passing Latino and in a disadvantaged community and making it into tech, and as well having my experience listened to, taught me that I need to use that white passing privilege to break down those barriers and to open the door for more women who don't have that white passing privilege. And I think that everyone in this room needs to acknowledge that we all have a responsibility to dismantle white supremacy, and especially with regards to our industry, because it's ours. Here. And these men will have you thinking otherwise. They'll think that they've colonized it, and that it's their industry, but it's not, it's ours. The most creative, the most powerful, and the most talented people I've ever worked with have all been women. And I think that the industry is young enough into where we can have a really dramatic impact on who has access to this industry. I want to take sort of, young Julie, who didn't feel like she had access to it, young Manisha, young Tiffany, like all these girls who I grew up with, and I want to give them access to it. And I think that requires help from all of you as well. So again, introspection, incredibly important. I recently had a really powerful conversation. Do any of you follow Marco Rogers on Twitter? Yes. See a couple nods, okay, yeah. So Marco is an ex-coworker of mine. We did not realize that we shared a lot of the same passions and motivations for being in tech and opening the door for more people like us until fairly recently, until it became something that we discussed in places like Twitter and Facebook. You kind of see people posting the same things as you are, and you're like, you're my people. And you're like, where have you been? It's a really exciting moment, and I would like to see more of that personally. But I had a really interesting conversation with Marco, and it was that, it actually, he said, Julie, I appreciate that, you're introspective. This isn't just, I'm not going to give myself compliments up here, I promise. There's a point to this. But he said introspection is incredibly important because we can point at the pipeline all day and we can say, pipeline's the problem, we got to get more people into the pipeline. But that means we're refusing to address or acknowledge that we're all accountable for what we're building and we're all complicit in it. So I want to encourage everyone to be a little more introspective. A couple ways that we can do that is look at things like, who are you retweeting? Are the women in your engineering pipeline all white women? Feel free to shout out your answers if you have a few. And that's okay. That's the thing is this is painful, and I understand that it's uncomfortable to acknowledge that, we're all a part of the problem, but we are. And I think that, if we get to the point where we can be a little more vulnerable, then I think we can kind of move the spectrum as far as diversity in tech goes. Another question we can ask ourselves is, does my team have a policy in place to handle something like a microaggression in the workplace? If it doesn't, that's pretty telling, right? And these are all things we can be bringing up to our managers and saying, hey, this is something we need to do now, because if we don't do it now, no one's going to come work here. That represents any demographic other than white male or the class that's already protected by the technology industry. What does your leadership team look like? Is it 100% white male? Who can you complain to about that? Who can you talk to about that? Is there a person that you can confide in at your company? And if there isn't, why are you still there? Are you willing to sit on a panel or be interviewed for an article that doesn't also feature Black and Latino women? And that's where we can kind of take back some of that power and say, you know what? Your website doesn't feature a single Black woman. I'm not going to lend you my name, my image. We can say no. And of course, that comes to a little bit of a detriment of ourselves and our brand. But I think that's a sacrifice that I know I'm willing to make, and I hope other people are willing to make it with me. Do you make assumptions about your coworkers' interests and lifestyles because of the color of their skin? Do you approach the Black person in your office and talk to them about hip hop without even knowing them or knowing their interests? Do you only link to or include the work of white men and white women in the blog posts you write? Think about thought leaders in our community and who we can be better surfacing in the things that we put out into the world. I'm guilty of this, absolutely, for sure. And that's something I'm super happy to admit, and something that I really want to work on. When you volunteer to teach kids to code or design, are there any youth of color represented? When you've offended someone, do you apologize? My good friend Erica Baker, who happens to be in the room tonight. Yeah, come on, clap or something, This really, she was interviewed by TechCrunch recently. She's an engineer at Slack, and this really kind of struck a chord with me, and it was like, you can give money to all these organizations, and you can, feature women of color who don't work at your company on your website, and you can, make your illustrations brown. But are you listening to women of color, and do you give them a platform and a microphone in which to speak? So I wanted to introduce you to a few people that I follow online who can maybe help, educate's the wrong word, you are all educated women, but help kind of broaden your horizon of who you're following online. I think the problem that I'm seeing in tech, or the thing that drives me crazy, honestly, is that those lists. Do you guys ever see those lists, like popular feminists in tech, And it's just like, and they always ignore the ones who criticize them, It's always funny in that way, Like Shanley's never on that list. She's never on that list, but it's like, I think she tweeted something like, the women we won't admit are, actually influential. And yeah, that would be all of us. You kind of get blackballed from those lists once you go against the status quo. But I like it. I like being on the edge, Yeah, and so that's the thing is about tech, especially it's everyone's voices. It's all of your voices are so valid and important and great. And we need to stop kind of looking at being a woman in tech as a platform necessarily, or a status or an identity, and more about it being a place to voice your opinion and to also raise the voices of other people. I look at women in tech as this huge, have you ever seen those beautiful murals that are made all out of little tiles? You know what I'm talking about? They're all smaller images, and they make one big image. And that's how I think about women in tech. I see it as this beautiful mosaic of thousands, I know that's so sad considering the population of the United States, United States, but thousands of voices that are all important and valid, and I think we need to start recognizing more of those voices. And so I listed a few here. If you got your phones out, I'll give you some time. Kaya Thomas is amazing. She's an iOS developer and a TechCrunch contributor. She's someone that everyone here should follow. We're going to go through these, I think, fairly fast. Courtney is a Black trans activist, but also a startup founder, and he works on really important things. He's also Oakland-based, which is good for me. Erica Joy, aka Erica Baker, again in the house, is an incredible and important voice. And I'm not just saying this because she's now my friend, but she's an incredibly important voice, I think, in the shift from the movement of diversity in tech being solely about and for and servicing white women to being a broader, more intersectional movement, which I think we have the potential to make it. Marco Rogers, I mentioned earlier, again, an ex-coworker of mine at Camera, but also just a really powerful voice for diversity in tech. Rockback is Raquel Velez, and I just wanted to take a moment. She's a huge mentor of mine. She's Latina, and I don't know where I would be without her, but she's someone that demonstrates excellence in our industry, and I think deserves a little more recognition for that, but again, a really great voice to follow. Chrissy Tillman is amazing. She's an East Coaster, but we forgive her for that. And then Tiffany Ashley Bell, who founded the Detroit Water Project. The crazy thing about women in color in tech is they're building all these amazing things, but they don't necessarily have the megaphone to scream about them. And so I think that's all of our jobs. I think that's my job. I think that's everyone in this room's job, is to use your platform and your influence, and in a big way, your privilege, to shout the names of all these really accomplished women of color and to make more space and room for them. Another one is Saren. She runs the Code Newbies podcast, and I've gotten to see her journey over the last few years, and it's been really inspirational. Finishing up here, I promise. I know you guys want to go home. You excited still? Maybe not, a little bit. Tired. Food is good though, right? Yeah, everyone's like, yeah, food, stop talking.
No one is saying that. So you know.
I mean, maybe it's just me. I'm just like, oh God, food. One thing I also wanted to point out, a lot of times I see, and I've started criticizing a little bit of like the white feminist movement, and that doesn't mean white women. What it means is like this core or set of ideals that only services or serves to protect and center white women, especially, or their needs specifically. I've started noticing this in other places, like pop culture, which has been a really interesting thing because it's definitely mirrored what's happening in diversity in tech. One such thing is the Nikki Taylor beef. Are you guys aware of this? I'm a really big pop culture fiend and big fan of Nikki, obviously. But one thing I notice is, when someone criticizes something structural, it becomes a personal insult to white women, and I think that's the wrong attitude to have. And this is like a really good example of it. Another one is Zendaya got a Barbie made after her, and it was beautiful because she had dreadlocks in the Barbie, which I think is the first Barbie ever with natural hair and/or dreadlocks. Really big moment, I think, for all women, but especially women of color. But Demi Lovato, who's a white Latina, made that about her again. And I think that we need to be better allies to one another. Or, to be honest, women of color have always been there for all women. So maybe white women, we just need to be a little better of allies to women of color. And not make the conversation necessarily about us and our own personal hurt, and more about promoting all women again. Again, structural criticism is never personal. It's more about attacking the system and pointing out flaws so that we can make it better. It's it's so much bigger than all of us, honestly. So I really love this. This quote, a lot of people see ally, like the term ally, as something, a badge that you can wear, or a pin that you get for, I don't know, 5 gold stars from your black friends. I don't know what people think allyship actually is. But I really like this definition of it, because what it says is that it's not an identity, it's not something you identify with, but it's more of a process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized people. It's a constant and arduous practice of unlearning and reevaluating. I think that's what we need to remember. We're never going to fix diversity in tech. That's never going to happen. It's going to be a long and arduous journey, but I think it's one that's worth it because I'm sick of seeing people that I love and care about and respect and that are doing excellent work excluded from the benefits and the reward of working in tech. An additional thing is that typically marginalized people are hired into companies to do one job. And then typically what happens is you end up having to do two jobs. One of them is correcting the behavior of other people, being this happened to me at GitHub, I was sort of like the litmus test for offensive shit. Like someone would say something really offensive and then look at me, and if my skin crawled, I guess they knew they were in trouble, with me, obviously. But that needs to stop. We need to remove the burden. We all need to be doing the work. I don't think it needs to be placed on the shoulders of marginalized people. I think that we need to share and better distribute diversity work within tech, because what ends up happening is people who take on both their normal jobs and the diversity work jobs that they sometimes don't even want. Like sometimes we just want to do our normal jobs. They're often criticized internally for it, torn down for it, and eventually fired for it. And it's something we witnessed recently with Twitter and the recent layoffs. And more importantly, this is probably the biggest message, is that collectively in this room, we probably don't have as many Twitter followers as a Kardashian. Let's be honest. But the tools that we're building have a really big impact on culture, on communication, on the way that people treat one another and the way that people perceive one another. And the biases that we have, the unconscious or otherwise, are not only going to be projected on the people around us, our friends, our coworkers, our children, but they're also going to be instilled in the things that we built. And so that's the reason to start deconstructing them right now. One last plug. I had the privilege of meeting a wonderful woman last night. Every Wednesday, my company, Clef, we host something called Clef Cooks. Have any of you heard of this? No? You should all come. You're all welcome. Every Wednesday, we cook food for you and for anyone you bring. And it's free. You don't have to bring anything. It's in Oakland. You can get to know Oakland a little better. I'm happy to do that also. I should conduct tours, basically, at this point. I love it. But I had the privilege of meeting Yvonne, and she is a Black woman who recently started a consultancy to consult startups and tech companies specifically on hiring diverse candidates, filling their pipeline with diverse candidates. And by diverse, I mean not only white women, I mean people of color, and getting them jobs. And she also consults around HR policy and law. So hire her, please. Send her email address to your CEOs, your CTOs. Let's start addressing this and shifting the narrative of diversity in tech toward a more inclusive and intersectional narrative. That's it for me. Yeah, thank you.